Time for Here's the Deal. Dara Parker, Chris Thompson, Lee Checkstead, as always. So good to see you all.
Thank you.
A story we talked about a lot last night. Linda Reid, Speaker of the House, admitting she paid for her hubby to fly first class to South Africa. What do you think of it?
Well, I certainly think she was in clear violation of her own policies, the government's policies around flying first class, and that's just wrong. And so we're all outraged and yada, yada, yada. But what bothers me is how outraged people get around these expense scandals when really this is a fraction of the dollars being spent and debated and deliberated on in government. And I'd like to see more attention focused on why we put X amount in education and X amount in discovering natural gas and that kind of thing. I really think that this is something that infuriates people, and it's really easy to attack from a citizen perspective, but it's distracting, and there are more important issues at play.
I don't necessarily agree with you in there because, yes, in this case it was $5,500, but we also did a story where she spent $45,000 on dollying up the members' lounge, and then there have been it all adds up. She is not the only one. This is not the only instance of wasteful spending. I think everyone, pretty much everyone, has their moments when they have been spending taxpayer dollars, and it does add up to a significant amount of money when it's all said and done.
It's numbers we can relate to.
And sure, and that's why we attack it, but I really think it's small potatoes, and I would be careful to paint that everyone's done it. I don't think everyone's done it, and I think the people who break the rules should be responsible and face consequences, and she clearly broke the rules. So make no mistake, I'm not excusing the behavior. I just think it's an easy thing to attack when there's much more important issues at play when we're talking about government dollars, the public, purse, and where we distribute those monies.
Interesting story out of SFU where the study suggests politicians who are longer served are more apt to spend the public's money poorly.
I think that makes sense. I'm going to agree with Dara because I think a lot of times people will start complaining about some story about how the government spent $5,500, and if you go on a population base of BC, that's about, what, 10 cents a person? So I'll give them a dime. There's your money back. You didn't waste any of your money. Now let's talk about something productive. But they're still angry for some reason.
I think you're right. I think it's relatable numbers, right? Like this is an airplane flight, and most of us, I've never flown first class. If somebody wants to sponsor that, I'm in. So it's relatable things, and we get angry, and I understand that sentiment. I just want to redirect the focus to something that really matters and understand that, and I don't know, have the watchdog who says, yes, you violated our policy, you're not allowed to travel, you're not allowed to bring your partner.
Should there be a government policy saying if you bring your partner along, you foot their portion of the bill?
Yes.
I thought there was one.
There should be, and I think there is.
Spencer said last night, though, there is something in there that it is commonplace for people to bring their spouses along, and I think we'd probably have to go back and check that, but I'm not certain that you're, I think sometimes...
If you do that in the private sector, if you take a spouse along to a trip, it's basically an employment benefit, and you have to pay tax on that. So for $5,000 worth of spousal benefits, you'd have to pay $20-some $100.
No, it's the small numbers that get politicians. Ms. Redford, Jenny Kwan, now Linda Reid. So it's something we're definitely going to keep an eye on. We had a very interesting chat with two doctors and an MP in the last segment about the right to die. Where do you guys come in on that?
That is a big debate, and it was interesting to sit here and listen to it. And I think that folks should have choices. I think that the word dignity is really important in this conversation, and the situations we're talking about, and it was clearly articulated that it's not every single situation. There are criteria and safeguards in place in terms of the legislation that's being debated right now around who would have access to euthanasia. And so I think that it's important that we give people choices around how to live their lives with dignity.
Is it a slippery slope, though, if you allow some assisted suicides and not others?
Well, I want to answer that because just about everything is a slippery slope. For example, if you can prescribe marijuana as a pain reliever, why can't you prescribe marijuana as a pain reliever to kids? Well, because it's against the rules, and the rules are there to prevent the slippery slope. And a lot of what the debate earlier centered around was, where do you draw the line? And if you draw the line, are there going to be some people on the other side of the line? And that is a relevant concern, but I think the question is, does drawing the line on the whole make everyone better off? And I think it would, as long as we have the proper enforcement and regulations.
There's always someone on the other side of the line.
Yeah.
Chris and I have never agreed this much ever on Unfiltered. Just for the record,
Yeah,
this is
normally.
unbelievable.
Okay, we're going to run out of topics, just so you know.
Well, no, I do think it's really important to look at those policy pieces. This is a big shift, and I don't think you enter into it blindly, but I do think we need to advance this conversation.
I had a personal story, if I can share it quickly. My grandmother was 102, went into cardiac arrest, but because they couldn't find her DNR, which she had, they had to perform CPR to resuscitate her. They had to do it, and the doctor was apologetic beyond belief because he did not want to do it, but he had no other choice. And then we finally figured it out, and we gratefully watched my grandmother pass away very peacefully, but she had broken ribs, and it was not the right thing for her to do. And if the law was a little more practical and a little more clear, I think we wouldn't have these debate or these problems.
And I think that's clear. We know the law as it stands isn't working. There are heartbreaking stories that we hear from folks who are in such incredible pain and just can't live the way they're living anymore, and so that's not right.
Okay, finally, cities to move away from. I don't know if you guys saw this on the internet. I hope you did, because there's this internet thing, 15 cities in Canada you should move away from for various reasons. There's no doctors, no jobs, no whatever. 5 of them are here in British Columbia. And tops of the pop, Williams Lake.
I read that and I kind of got angry when I read that, mainly because they just seem to take characteristics at random from cities at random. For instance, you could do that for Vancouver. You could say we've got terrible housing prices, we've got really bad rush hour traffic, and we have by far the worst wages for part-time TV panelists in the industrialized world.
I want to move away from here.
So we should leave Vancouver by that logic. Well, no, I think a lot of
us move to Powell River, just so everyone in Powell River is clear.
It seemed to me when I looked at the list of the BC towns, it was all places that used to thrive based on industry and salmon fishing and lumber mills and those sort of things that just don't exist anymore. And I think it's more a sign of changing times and a sign of the different ways our GDP is made up of than anything else.
Another example of lists making television easier to do.
Well, and there were no qualitative factors, right? That's a challenge with these kinds
Some of them were unemployment numbers. You know, the place in Newfoundland was the highest in
no, that's my
Canada.
point. That's a quantitative metric, but the qualitative metrics around the happiness index and how do people, maybe they prefer living a slower small town life where there's, more neighborhood friendliness as opposed to, employment's critically important, but I think that qualitative factor needs to be taken into account, and these kinds of measures don't do that.
So Fort Mac would be the top of your list?
I would not be moving to Fort Mac this month, but thank you for the suggestion, Chris. I want to stay here and keep debating with you.
Speaking of qualitative, I don't want to live in Vancouver from a qualitative standpoint, never mind a quantitative standpoint.
Really?
Bleep that out? What are you talking about?
Isolated. It's big city.
Socially isolated?
It's socially isolated.
See, that's why maybe you'd prefer, what was the worst city in BC to live in according to that list?
Williams
Move to Williams Lake. I bet there's really friendly people in
To all
Williams
my friends
Lake.
in Williams Lake, not going to happen. Powell River, I will move to Powell River. Okay.
Well, you should stop being such an introvert.
Yeah, I really should. I know.
You can go out there and meet people. There's a big world at the other side of that camera.
What? Outside the studio? Are you crazy? Quickly, sugar is the new cigarette this month, which sitting was the new cigarette a couple months ago.
Can I just say the only thing this article made me feel like is all I'm going to do is feel twice as guilty about eating the same amount of sugar that I do right now.
Yeah.
Really? Is this news? Because I don't understand how this is news. Sugar is not good for us?
I read a book called Salt, Sugar, and Fat, and it came out last year, and it traced the marketing. One of those 3 is always the demon. And so everything will now say low in fat and low in salt. And when sugar is the enemy, it'll say sugar is terrible, but then in 2 years we're going to find fat's terrible again, and all the marketing and boxes of things will change.
Everything in moderation,
Yes.
right?
Well, it's the processed food, right? It's what's become the new normal, is that everything we eat is fast and quick, and we've moved into these really unhealthy lifestyles, and we consume sugar ad nauseum, and I think it's become a normalized part of our diet, and that's the problem.
I think if you make all the food you eat, you'll be fine. Like, it's basically impossible.
Chris, will you make all the food that we eat?
I'm going to go back to my sugar-filled coffee right now and say that's enough. Okay, that's it. Here's the deal. Thank you very much for your time. Dara Parker, Chris Thompson, Lee Checkstead. Protesters hijack a show at the aquarium. They want to stop animals in captivity. Are they helping their cause or hurting it with this kind of display? That story is right after the break.